Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's VMware Security webinar. Before we begin, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can submit your questions in the Q&A box, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. You can also expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon on the top right of the slide viewer. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the Help widget. If you could please take a moment to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar, that would be great. I will now hand it over to your first presenter, James Allen.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for joining VMware Security Ransomware Defense in Depth. First and foremost, before we jump into the fireside chat / presentation today, let's introduce our speakers. So firstly, myself. My name is James Aliband. I'm a senior security strategist and also lead a global product marketing team here at VMware Carbon Black. I've been pretty much in my career in security, so the last 10 years, most of the whole of my career in security. I do a lot of keynote blogging, industry thought leading. And I've put that twice as well. Also, from a personal side, I'm a level 5 football, soccer referee. So not only managing people at work, but also managing 22 players out on the pitch. I'll now hand over to my esteemed colleague, Jared, who can introduce himself before we jump into the slides that we have for you today.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, James. So my name is Jared Myers. I'm the senior manager over the threat analysis unit for VMware Carbon Black. I've been working inside of security for a while. It says 18 years there, which does seem accurate, even though it makes me feel really old. But I've done everything from incident response to working as a reverse engineer for the DoD to now kind of managing and overseeing the threat analysis unit, which is charged with kind of lots of different little roles underneath the VMware and the Carbon Black and the SBU all together. So let's get started, James.
Let's do it. So first and foremost, we recently have released here at VMware Carbon Black our incident response and global threat outlook report. So this is a report that we do annually. And I wanted to bring to you a statistic, and Jared, feel free, after I read this out, we can kind of discuss this, is that 75% of the respondents to the report said that attack volumes have increased in the past year, and actually by 52% on average of that increase. So, Jared, in that sense, and I've certainly got my thoughts on this, but I'm certainly happy for you to kind of jump in here, is why do we think that the respondents are saying this? Why do you think that the respondents are saying that 75% of them have said the attack volumes have increased?
So, I mean, I think in general they have, and I think this may be kind of a combination of several different things. Like, people are starting to get better visibility inside their organizations, inside their environment, so they can, just know that they've had a problem. I think the second piece to this is maybe some of the types of attacks that are occurring are a lot more brazen and daring. So it's one thing if you have, kind of a super sophisticated, trying to stay very low key attacker in your environment. They're looking for IP and slowly taking it out over time. That could take you months, if not a year sometimes, in order to kind of determine that you even have a problem. Whereas like ransomware attacks, even though the attack may, only take a day, they'll be inside the environment for a couple of weeks before it's very apparent, So I think like a combination of the types of attacks that we're seeing more of, in combination with people just being able to have better visibility inside the thing. I mean, we've seen just more and more, I think, investment in kind of people beefing up their security, their staffing, kind of all these pieces. So I think it's kind of a combination in a lot. I don't know, and there's no way to really judge this, if it's truly kind of 75% or if it's 75% of what they're seeing. But I think kind of a combination of the two of, cyber attacks are just picking up. I mean, we're going to see more and more, especially as ransomware just continues to build steam, as well as kind of organizations building up their products, their solutions, and kind of their resources. I think you're kind of seeing this where this is probably an accurate picture that has been going on for a while, but we're just now starting to understand it more and start to have kind of better, I guess, visibility into what's going on.
That was really cool what you just said as well, Jared. And I wanted to really highlight that we truly have got better visibility on what's going on. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it, when you think about that, what you can't see, you don't know in that narrative. And in that sense of like, actually, when we can't see it, we don't know if we've been breached, or we don't know if there's somebody hiding within the network, or we don't know if there's a bad actor that has visibility of our network, but maybe it's penetrated that network. But because we haven't got the visibility, we don't necessarily know. So I think there is that certain aspect around like organizations have certainly got more visibility and context. I do think though as well, as you said, that, and certainly something we talk about a lot is around the cyber insurgency, and they're kind of creating the perfect storm as well. And, we have certainly seen this, and kind of jumping onto the next slide here, it really drives into that as ransomware has really become prevalent, and it's not to say prevalent over the last 18 months, because obviously ransomware is far outdated that. But when we created the perfect storm of a pandemic, and then working from home, and virtual and hybrid SOCs, where everyone was working from home and still trying to manage and still trying to keep their organization secure, I think that perfect storm ultimately gave the bad actors an opportunity. And look, criminals are opportunists, and they take opportunity and obviously make sure that they can utilize that for their own profit and their own benefit in that sense. But when we think about ransomware as well, and we think about and Jared, again, like, over to yourself on this, like when it comes to ransomware and the fact that it that truly is booming with business in that sense, and booming in how bad actors are ultimately building large enterprises out of ransomware attacks, and out of where we are in this current climate of cyber insurgency. Where do you think organizations can really start to protect themselves and start to look at different ways of ultimately evaluating the scenario that we currently live in, and actually starting to move things and shifting the power back onto themselves?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what we've seen, this has probably been like 5 years in the making, if not a little longer, where you saw ransomware kind of starting off as very targeted. People usually had kind of goals in mind before they did, to like almost this just enterprise, like ransomware as a service that you see today, which, I mean, it is a business. I mean, like in business is good. I mean, like it attracts a lot of people because the money's there. There's a lot of organizations that are kind of planning for this ahead of time. And I think from what we've seen, from the incidents that we've had visibility into, from what we work with a lot of our IR partners, from a lot of the other researchers we work in community, those first two bullet points there are some of the biggest keys to it. So ransomware is executed, that's bad. I mean, ultimately, like if it gets to the stage where the ransomware goes off and it's able to encrypt your drive, that's the worst part. Typically, your solutions should be able to help stop just that part. But really, kind of everything that occurs before there is what I think a lot of organizations should be focusing on. So a lot of times, the same basic things that we've seen for years, for lots of other attacks, are still the primary way in which a lot of these attackers are getting in. Unpatched, vulnerable, external-facing servers, RDP open to the internet without, MFA, and then kind of your initial like phishing, where they're now using what we're like traditionally we would call like banking, like first stage droppers and malware, to then later introduce kind of second stage stuff. Ultimately, that a lot of these like go through resellers. So if you can focus on some of these basic aspects, it goes a long way in preventing some of the harder things. I mean, there'll always kind of be the Kaseyas that pop up. And, like legitimate things have been leveraged to kind of, inject badness into your system. But there's a lot that goes into kind of taking care of this, these basis aspects that we've talked about. And that kind of goes into the second one. Like ultimately, if they can get on one system and ransom that one system, it's not great. As it turns out, that's not taking down your entire, like network, your entire organization. So the other thing is like the lateral movement, the harvesting of credentials, the prevention, privilege escalation, like all these pieces kind of play a part into it. And if you can make all those parts harder, if you can identify it, if you can stop it there, you don't ever have to worry as much about kind of this final stage of like when the ransomware gets executed. So that's something that I try to tell people about a lot, because a lot of people that come to us and they're like, I want to see that you stop this ransomware, and really what they want to see is like us just double click on this ransomware and a pop-up that says we stop it. And whereas that's a good thing, I think it can be kind of a false sense of security sometimes. And that if you can prevent all these other steps beforehand, you can stop the ransomware, you can stop these other types of attacks. Like that's really where what pays the best dividends in my mind is to focus on that and let that kind of like execution, the prevention of the execution of ransomware be the last thing. Like that should be the airbag in your car that you hope, helps you out, if things ever get that bad. And that last bullet point was a poor attempt at humor, but thermal exhaust ports. On the Death Star, I mean, if we have any like Star Wars like fanatics out there, the Death Star was good. Like they built like this big powerful thing, and this one little hole took it down. Like later we found out that it was kind of planned, but regardless, there was this one thing that if done in a certain way could take down the entire system. And what we're seeing a lot now is people are beefing up in certain areas, and there's still kind of these holes that they have in there. They have a very VM, like a rich environment where they're running lots of VMs. All the VMs themselves are fairly hardened. They all have sensors put on them, things like that. However, like the vSphere admin console to get to all those VMs is not very well protected. Like you don't have to go through certain jump boxes. It's not, like two-factor authenticated to, get into these. I mean, there's like lots of pieces. And then if they can steal credentials, if they're able to kind of move laterally, they can just move and take out all the VMs that are kind of running in this instance just by getting access to the admin port. And that kind of goes back to just, like maintaining identity, like good, kind of identity accountability. So there's lots of different things. And I think you kind of have to think of it from like all those pieces when we're looking at it. So.
No, I think that was great context, and it kind of drives us into the next area that we would want to talk about as well, which is visibility is paramount. And I think it's so key when we think about ransomware, zero-day attacks, advanced attack techniques that the bad actors are utilizing. And Jared, you said it so elegantly earlier around like, this is a business. It's a business for criminals, business for the ransomware and attacking cyber criminal gangs. And the bad actors out there. But ultimately, when we think about shifting the needle and shifting that forward, visibility to me is key. Like we said this earlier, like what you can't see or what you don't know, you don't know it's there. You don't know it's there in your environment. But from that point of view, where do you think, Jared, that we should be really starting when we think about gaining visibility and grafting visibility back to, as I said earlier, kind of like shifting the power back, shifting the table and shifting the power back on the table to yourselves within your SOC and not necessarily to the criminals.
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest, I guess, thing that happens, like 0 days happen, they do. And they're not, I mean, like if this year has kind of taught us anything, they're increasing and not decreasing, as I think we kind of all hope they would. But whether it's zero-day attacks, whether it is like supply chain compromise, I mean, like things are going to happen. And I think kind of preemptively having this visibility in your environment. When I say that, it's one thing to like be able to answer the question, like if your CEO comes to you, if your board comes to you and says, this 0 day happened, we know that we use this, are we safe? Like, can you answer that question? Like, that's a huge thing that a lot of people can't answer with any real like certainty. They're like, well, I don't think so. We're going to check our logs, but maybe. But I mean, if you can go back in and say, yeah, like here's where we see these processes running. We've had these in place. We have detections in place around them. We know what's normal inside of this. Like we understand like what these processes typically do, and we have not seen an abnormal activity or any type of, like fringe things occurring out of this. Like that's hugely powerful. Like that's the answer that you need to be able to tell people, or the opposite of like, no, as it turns out, we looked and we absolutely have an issue and we've already moved to contain it. And here's where we're at. We've done A, B, and C, and that's working our way up to, D, E, and F. And that's where we're going to have this fully mitigated, and we'll be able to, present to you exactly what occurred, what the impact is to our customers or our business or things like that, whether or not it was, a breach or a data breach. I mean, like all these types of things are hugely important for a security team, for CISOs, for CIOs to be able to tell to, their stakeholders and answer these questions. And it always surprised me doing IR how many organizations could not answer some of those questions, just simply because they didn't have the visibility. It's not because they didn't want to. It's not because they, they did all these things wrong. They just didn't have the right visibility. And I think that last key, they didn't have the right visibility, is like a really big piece to it. I mean, if you look across all the tools that you have, and I think every organization, regardless of size now, has, a dozen different tools and solutions inside their environment. I think at least yearly going back and taking a review of those and saying, why did I buy this? What gap was I trying to fill? What answer was I trying to be able to answer, with this tool? And is it providing that? And if not, why do we have this still? Is this simply because it's a regulatory thing? Like we have to have this in here for whatever reason? Or is this because we were hoping it would give us this type of visibility or able to answer these types of questions? And as it turns out, we don't use it. Or it's not capturing exactly what we thought. And I think that's a very good understanding. And I think being very transparent with, those vendors that you have in there of like, we expected this tool to do A, B, and C, and it doesn't, period. So we either need to fix that or we need to figure out how we're going to get the visibility and go with a different, product or solution to get that, and then actually leverage those tools. Doing IR, we would show up and we would kind of understand the backstory and we would say, I need A, B, and C. The first things I'd like to do is look at these logs, look at this data, and the organization would say, that's great. We have that data. And then there was some internal discussion. They'd be like, I think, Paul was the one that really handled all that data. Well, Paul left the company like 6 months ago, so we're going to have to figure out how to get you access. That's not great. Like if you haven't looked at the data in 6 months, that means that a lot of things could have been happening. And it's kind of the other things is if you're putting these tools in place, you also need to kind of put the right people in place to leverage that. It's one thing to record and track all this data. It's a completely another step to actually do something meaningful with it. And I think that's kind of a step that people need to get to. And often I don't think it's that you have to have one or the other first. You can have good people in there, and without the proper tools, there's not much that they can do. And if you have the right tools in there and there's no one that's operating them, they're not going to be as beneficial of a use to you as they could be. And I think that's just kind of an internal discussion that organizations need to have is like, we've bought this fancy car. Now, do we have a race car driver that can drive it? If not, maybe we need to look at an external like MDR service or an MSSP service to help augment, some of those gaps as we build up these teams. So, yeah, I mean, it all kind of boils down to having visibility and then having the right people look at that data to really make sure that you are secure, that you are protected and all that.
Yeah, and it's key as well, like the powers of the people. And if you don't have the necessary skill sets to utilize the tools, you can, as you said, you can arm your garage with the best cars that you have in the, in the world, or you can give your construction team the best tools to be able to build a house. But if they don't know how to build the house, and you don't have the skill set to be able to build the house, then you're never going to be able to build the house. And you're certainly going to be able to, you're certainly not going to be able to build the best house. So, I think from that point of view, you're absolutely key. I think it's absolutely key there, Jared, from that point of view. And I certainly see that as well. Like, we talk about empowering the SOC and modernizing the SOC a lot. And what we really mean there is, how can we give your security operations center not only the best tools, but also giving the people a chance to succeed, or giving them the ability to succeed as well. As you said, if you've not seen the data in the last 6 months, and you're trying to then say, well, hey, Paul left 6 months ago and we haven't looked at that data because we didn't think we needed to, and everything becomes outdated. But actually your security operations at that point is kind of failing because you're not seeing and you're not having the ability to see, the data in time, and you're also not giving your tools the ability to shine because your people don't know how to utilize them well in that sense as well. So I think it's super interesting from that point. And I think, also when we look at that and we shift that forward, we also know that attackers are people as well. They're not robots. We're talking about real criminals here, and you see it on the news and you say, oh, hey, like, and this is probably not the best example in today's world, but you say like, hey, you watch a video of, somebody running into a jeweler's or a bank or whatever, and they've got weapons and a bag over their head or a balaclava over their head, and you can see they're real people. And you can see the real people, and you see what they've done, and you see what the damage they've caused, and you see what they've stolen. And then you get, a couple of days later, they identify the people, and you've got faces across the internet saying, we are on a manhunt for these people, and we're looking for these people. But the reality is the cyber criminals are also people as well. And Jared, do you want to talk to this a little bit in the sense of, how we can, embrace the world of criminals, but also understand that these are real people as well? Yeah,
I mean, ultimately, the attackers make mistakes, period. It's easy to have kind of this sense sometimes that they're these superhuman people that, have all, the resources they can think of at their fingertips. But I mean, ultimately, they're people. Some of them work for government, some of them work for military, some of them work for organized crime, but they have some of the same problems that we do. And a lot of times, especially if you're talking about ransomware and you're talking about like criminally focused activity, they're trying to make money. And if they can make money an easier way, an easier path, they'll take that path. It's a little bit different sometimes with espionage that if you hold, a couple of key secrets, they're going to focus a lot of resources on you. But a lot of times with the criminal stuff, especially when they're trying to extort money or things like that, whether they steal $100 from you or $100 from someone else, they don't really care oftentimes. So if you can focus on exploiting, like the mistakes that they make and the ways in which they do it, that's excellent. And the second piece to that of kind of embracing the purple and doing purple teaming exercise is huge. Ultimately, all of these people that are breaking into stuff, regardless of where they're at in the world and where they came from, they had to learn from someone else. It's not like there were people born with just innate hacking skills. And a lot of those same people are learning from the same types of people that learn from other people. And some of our best red teamers, our best, attack emulators and things like that, learn the same exact tradecraft that some of these very sophisticated and advanced attackers do. If you look back like 15 years ago, it's not like there were a lot of college courses on hacking, so there was like people learned from the government or people, did a lot of stuff in their basement to try to get better. But now there's entire, college curriculums built around this, and they're being taught by people that learned, at the NSA or, DOD or kind of all these other things. So you can hire red teamers or purple teamers, whether that's internally to your organization or because you're contracting that out, that have some amazing capabilities. And I think that's so important that a lot of times people put a lot of hurdles and fences and defenses in place, and they're like, we're 100% good. And they don't find out until they have an incident that they weren't as good as they thought. And if you can control that attack, if you can say, we're going to hire someone to come in and try to make sure that we're aligned, that we have the right visibility, that we have the right preventions in place, that's a much better time to kind of sort out some of those problems than, once you get notified by, some government agency or, you realize that you've lost a ton of data. So, ultimately, attackers can be stopped. Even with some of the most sophisticated things that they do, at some point they have to go back to kind of some of these old methodologies and learning and leaning into, some of these red teamers or purple teamers and doing some of those exercises and just saying, all right, you did these 10 things. Now let's make sure that we can see all those inside of our console. And do we have detections for them? Do we have alerts for them? Do we have preventions for them? How did we do? We think that one of our biggest, attackers right now, we're extremely worried about, Canada coming after us because we have all the maple syrup secrets in the world. Well, maybe as it turns out, you should hire somebody to emulate, attackers that originate out of Canada to kind of look into that. And it gives you a better sense of, not only did we put these defenses in places, but I feel like we went through a really good test and we held up well, or we identified these key places where we still need improvement, and that's on the list to work into. I think also widening out your focus is another good thing. So if you caught one thing, you had one alert and it was like, we caught this thing, oftentimes I see people treating that very symptomatically of like, we caught this and we fixed it and it's not a problem anymore. From an attacker standpoint, if one thing doesn't work, they just try the next thing, and then the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. Hopefully you can, eradicate them, remediate them, kick them out before they get to something that works. So if you caught one thing, that's not the end of the show. You need to understand what all occurred before we caught this one thing, what occurred after we caught this one thing. And if you don't have that type of visibility, you really can't answer the questions, because a lot of times they're like, well, we stopped, Mimikatz from running. That's wonderful. How did Mimikatz get on the box in the first place? Like, what are all the 20 steps that occurred that maybe you should look into so that you can close that, so next time they don't come back with something that doesn't get stopped? And if you stop Mimikatz, do they pivot to another, tool? Were there other techniques that they tried? And are you sure that you adequately contain this incident? So I think kind of a combination of doing Purple Team X. I really can't talk enough about that. Like we the TAL team and how we write detections learn so much. We have an entire internal team that we work with that does this. Some we do blind attacks where we just say, go at it. And others we're testing very specific things where we say, we want you to, think of every way that you can to do technique A, B, and C. And we're going to see what are our detections and our preventions around that, and how can we improve that. Doing that for your own organization, I think is key. If you don't have that in kind of internal team, try to push for the funding to, do that once a year with a reputable, external team, not just someone that's doing kind of Nessus scans and something like that, but a legitimate, like red team, like penetration test. So.
We can certainly tell that you can talk through, how passionate you are there, Jared, as well. And I know that you and I have spoken a lot about the different areas around that, but it's, and I think shifting that forward as well is, now we're seeing more and more, cloud-based attacks. We're seeing, this really the most frequent attack type over the past year. So I think without the obvious necessarily there, like, why do we think that we're seeing these cloud-based attacks? And then a word that I know, our very own Tom Kellerman has coined a lot around cloudjacking as well, and really looking from kind of public cloud front. So I think it'd be great for our audience to understand, our view on, why do we see the cloud attacks being the most frequent type of attack, and then that kind of vulnerability as we start to shift to the public cloud.
Yes, I think a lot of people are moving, different services, different types of data, obviously out of data centers that they have to maintain and produce, and keep up with internally. And a lot of things are moving to the cloud, whether it's Azure or AWS, or kind of all of these places, which is good and bad things. There's always trade-offs. So, like, on one hand, you don't have to, administer it and keep up with hardware. Like, you just pay X amount of dollars, and, it's up and running, and it's always available. I think the keys to that is you also lose a bit of control to that. And that's just kind of a risk that you have to accept when you move things out there. Like, can we make this as secure as we could internally? The answer oftentimes is yes. But like the second thing is, can we monitor what's going on in some of these environments? So let's say that we're pushing a bunch of workloads, or we're pushing a bunch of systems up to the cloud, and they're going to, work there. Can we install, different agents to make sure that we have visibility into what's going on there? If not, can we, get different types of logs from the provider? And if so, what do those logs contain? And how can we kind of look into that? So, I think it's just another avenue that as IT, as, the way that businesses do business are moving more to the cloud, because it's an affordable, way to kind of, move things over and take certain, I guess, hardships off of your plate. Attackers are moving there too. If why did people rob the bank? Because that's where the money was. We're going to only continue to see these increases, in these types of attacks. I think identity is a huge piece here. Ultimately, if you can get in there remotely, and that's not a very narrow scope of exactly who can get in and how they can get in, and that's not very restricted, that just opens up kind of the, your plane of how you can be attacked. And then after that, it again comes down to visibility and logs and understanding what is coming and going in and out of there, what process is running on there. There are definitely some conversations about, what happens if those providers get hacked, and they push data down to us. Those are huge concerns. Like, I'm not trying to underestimate those. However, some of those, there's little that you as a consumer can do about that. At some point you have to put a little bit of your, your faith in whatever provider that you've chosen, because they're all going to tell you, yes, we're completely secure and there's nothing we can do about it. Is that a real threat? Absolutely. I mean, like that could happen, and that's kind of the ultimate thing. Like why infect one person when you can infect thousands at a time? But I'll be honest with you. I mean, there's not much that you can do around that to help protect yourself outside of use someone very reputable. Make sure that you're doing everything you can with your security, to be able to access it, what you have running there, and then again, kind of gain as much visibility you can into yourself, so that if that provider, something does happen to them, if that moves into your environment, if they move into your services, into, the computing resources that you're using, you at least have visibility into that.
And I think, when we kind of look at it from a leverage of the art of possible, and, as you said, like, why attack one person when you can attack thousands? I think we're not too far away from seeing a major public cloud attack. And, maybe this is the first time I've certainly said this, but like, I think you're absolutely spot on there. It's, the opportunity and the realm of possibility there. But I think we also have an opportunity to protect those environments and help, really take responsibility for our data that sits within these public cloud environments. And, how do we protect those environments? How do we protect our control planes? And how do we protect, what we're doing, what we're hosting, the applications that we're running within those cloud environments? And I think also, the art of the multi-cloud as well. This is an area which I think there was a major push to the public cloud. And it's kind of like, oh, well, we're in this pandemic, we've got to move everything to make it accessible. And, data centers with a ton of different servers in just were kind of old school now. And it's kind of like, well, actually, the multi-cloud environment adds an element of resilience. And cyber resilience is such an important point when we think about shifting to this new world, this new way of working. Is actually, can we be hybrid? Can we be flexible between? Can we have that multi-cloud environment, which ultimately offers that element of resilience, that offers that element of actually spreading the risk and spreading what we have? So I feel really strongly about that. It's something I certainly, really want to empower, and especially certainly when I'm speaking to customers, is around actually spreading the risk and spreading what we have out in building our environments across multiple public clouds and across multiple different environments, across multiple different data centers. Because, yes, again, it might sound scary in the scope of, well, actually, I'm kind of building things across multiple different areas, but you're also spreading risk as well. And spreading risk is a really important thing. I think an interesting statistic as well that came out, and I'm certainly happy to kind of talk to this, is around the 56% of respondents to our Global Insight security report actually feared material breach in the next 12 months. And I'll certainly offer some of my thoughts here. I think that, I look at it from two elements. I look at it from brand protection and brand reputation, and also then, fully into material breach. And, firstly, talking about brand protection, or, ultimately kind of making sure that we can protect our brand. I think security has such a pivotal role to play here. And, in a sense of, where does, and thinking about this from an organizational layer, like, where does the CISO report? What board level conversations are we having as an organization which actually involves security? Or from that point of view, are we looking at our brand and saying, how do we protect that? And it's rare that a company or an organization which has been breached or has had a major cyber attack actually recovers from that attack itself. And we can actually avoid that by actually taking, and understanding there is a legitimate fear there, which I think is absolutely fair, but also, a legitimate fear in the sense of making sure that we can actually protect our brand as well. And then, when we also think about, material breach, and we're thinking about breaching, contracts from that point of view, think about like the Kaseya attack is a great example of, that supply chain attack where, ultimately, we flip this on the other side from the service provider point of view. We're actually put in our position where we've got contractual agreements with customers, and those contractual agreements should constitute that we're not going to put those customers into jeopardy as well. So, I certainly think from my point of view, first thing as well to think about is from a brand protection point of view, and I think security has such a pivotal role to play there. But also, shifting that forward, really being able to offer customers that security, whether that be from a cloud provider or an MSSP, for example, to really give that the strength. But I think the legitimate fear is there, and certainly understandable. Jared, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, ultimately, I'm kind of surprised. I would have assumed, like, if I was a CISO, like, I would just kind of constantly be worried that this was, coming, like what's kind of lurking underneath the water that I can't quite see. But yeah, obviously this statistic makes complete sense. I think depending on what your organization does, like what you do, like there's the concern, like, obviously, like if we lose IP, that's not great, to competitors. If we, lose trust in our company, that's even a bigger thing. To some extent, especially depending on who you are. If you're a service provider, and your platform is used to breach lots of other people, people are just going to have kind of a hard time coming back and saying, like, yeah, like we want to again use this provider when we know that they were the cause of like all these massive outbreaks that occurred before. So yeah, it's not overly surprising. I can't believe that realistically not more people fear something. I fear it for lots of people, and that's not even kind of like my main job. So yeah, I'd say this is spot on, if not a little low, to be honest with you. So.
No, and I think you're right. Like, that statistic surprised me, albeit a little bit, because I think if I kind of look at it from the CISO's point of view and even from a board level point of view, like, I think, in my humble opinion, I'd probably say, well, 100% of people should be fearing material breach. And certainly in the next 12 months, but certainly in the next 5 years as well. Like, yeah, I think we should also, we always should fear material breach. I 100% agree with you there. I think it's, I go back to the narrative around brand protection as well. Like, our brand, we are across the organization, we are all responsible for our brand. We wear it on our sleeves, we wear it on our chest, and whether it's Jared and I wearing a piece of VMware gear that's a t-shirt or a coat or whatever it might be, you promote your brand. But I think it also, we have to see that from two elements. We have to see that, one, from the side, the side that we're actually working, we're employed somewhere and we're promoting that brand, but we also have to be responsible for protecting that brand as well. And that goes all the way up to the board, where the conversations have to be sitting there saying, how do we ultimately ensure that we can protect that brand from, protecting that brand, whether you're, somebody sitting in reception or sitting, not clicking on a phishing email, all the way up to, ensuring that the right conversations are at the right layer of the organization, which I'm really talking about the board here, to ensure that we're protecting the brand, and the brand should be at the central point.
Yeah, I hope that more boards, more CEOs, more stakeholders at that level start to, I think, let security play a bigger piece in some of the decision making. Obviously, these boards, these CEOs don't have easy jobs. They have to worry about just the business succeeding without, what are these just like indirect, consequences of, them being targeted, maybe opportunistically, or maybe because, like they have very specific IP that someone wants. But yeah, my hope is that as more of these attacks are being presented, kind of in the mainstream, like you're seeing a lot more things being reported, that everyone's kind of leveraging these to at least take in front of their board, their CEOs, their decision makers, and saying, look, like we need to put together a comprehensive plan that's, what are we doing to improve this? Because that's the other question. Like if you do have a breach, that's the first thing that comes out is what did you have in place to prevent this? Was it a bunch of check boxes, that you just were able to check off just to say that you had it, or were you doing meaningful things? So yeah, this is a tough position, especially for like the CIOs, the CISOs. That they want more, that they're asking for more. Oftentimes they're trying to make the most of what they have or what they can get. But my hope is really that, like the board members, the CEO people start to make this a bigger priority, in kind of their long-term, strategic planning.
Absolutely. And the final, area that we wanted to talk about today was applications and workloads of using the most vulnerable points in the data journey. And I think, look, I think we've covered a lot of this today. I think, visibility is paramount, first and foremost. And, we've certainly seen, cloud-based attacks becoming the most frequent, the attack type that has been experienced in the past year. And that all adds to the vulnerability of applications and workload. But I think also this this comes into the case that this is where our most critical data is hosted. Our applications are accessible by too many people at times, which makes that even more of a vulnerable point. And then our workloads are hosting our applications, are hosting our data, which ultimately we've got X amount of employees that are trying to access those different applications and workloads. But because that has to, and Jared, I think you said this earlier when you said around the, if we have one endpoint breached, but that's the only part of the breach, then, okay, you've been breached, but the exposure actually isn't that high. And to be honest, it's fairly recoverable. But if your applications and workloads are breached and they can laterally move across their public cloud data center, wherever that may be, and the blast radius is fairly high, it's actually quite a critical attack. It's an attack that's of scope and scale could take down an organization. So, this statistic didn't surprise me. And certainly the report itself, and there's 3,500 CISOs that were interviewed, by the way, for the audience listening in today, did see that applications and workloads are viewed as the most vulnerable point. Jared, do you have anything to add to this statistic at all?
Sorry, getting off mute there. No. We've talked about it. We've indirectly kind of talked about this throughout this entire talk is the workloads, the VMs that people are kind of moving to as we move more away from kind of, traditional data centers. I think it has to be something that is at the forefront of the planning and the architecture. If we're making a business case, a use case to move, to this type of, computational, resource, we're moving more to kind of cloud computing. Are we going to be on parity with the same type of security that we have now? And is that part of the conversation? I think a lot of times it starts out as just a monetary use case of it's cheaper long-term to do it this way. And that's fine. And I understand why lots of businesses want to take that. And I'm not saying that that's not a great thing to do. But I do think that security stakeholders should have a big, role in that of saying, okay, we completely support this as a business, venture. However, we want to make sure that we have the same type of visibility, the same type of security in place so that we can continue to do our job as effectively, as we can. And if we can't today, that's not saying that we should never, but let's put a couple more things in place. Let's push this out a month or so that we can set ourselves up for success rather than we're just going to do this. And I hope, the security side of it can catch up.
No, I couldn't agree more on that sense. So with that in mind, let's jump to a few different takeaways that we have for the audience. It's always good to leave something for you to see. And let's go with a bit of the old start, continue as well. I think first and foremost to start consolidating. Start consolidating your tools where possible. Add visibility points and context. We spoke a lot today about visibility is paramount. And you're going to get visibility by consolidating your security stack and consolidating where possible. And that goes into the second element around stopping adding more tools. Adding more tools for the case of a point product that's great at one thing, but really it silos the organization. And continue to partner with, we've really spoke about this today as well around, ultimately the criminals partner together, the criminals build an ecosystem together, which is ultimately creating a larger attack vector. So from our point of view, we partner, from Carbon Black's point of view, VMware's point of view, we certainly partner in the industry and build a better vendor landscape, sharing threat intelligence, for example, but also partnering at your level as well. We're learning from each other, learning from different people across organizations and also partnering to really enhance security operations. So with that brings us up to the end of today's presentation. I want to say and of course give you the opportunity to close this out. Jared, has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today and to run through this presentation with you and just great to get a lot of your insights especially from the VMware town.
Yeah, I always love talking security with you, James. So it's always a pleasure. I hope that, if nothing else, some of the attendees were able to take away, one or two things, just different perspectives that they didn't think about. Ultimately, we really do care. We want to make things better. So, I think that's the one thing. Like, if there's things that you wish that we would do, or things that you feel that we can improve on, please, like work through kind of your point of contacts or your sales representatives. They'll put you in touch with Tal, and we want to try to help any way we can. So I really appreciate it, James, for setting this up. So I'll talk to everyone again later.
Yeah, and likewise, Jared. I couldn't agree more. I absolutely love our whether it's our Monday weekly calls or whether it's doing webinars with yourself like today. Absolutely love talking security with you, and I, just to reiterate, it's we're all here as security professionals to ultimately make the world a safer place for cyber attacks, and that truly is within Jared and I and myself within our heart, and also everybody here at VMware, and also everybody at our competitors as well. As much as it's great to have a competitive landscape, and I'm really focusing on the partnering element of this slide as well here, is it's truly important that we also partner to really make the world a safer place from cyber attacks, because we're all in it for the same goal. We're there to protect you and to help protect you and work with you. And if you don't feel like we are, we are doing things as well as you'd like us to do, reach out, talk to us. We're a community, and that community is better when we all communicate together. So with that, I'm going to close it out. Thank you so much for everyone joining today's session. It's been great to talk about things that we're passionate about. I'm sure you'll hear from us both soon.
Thank you to our presenters and all of our attendees. That will conclude today's webcast.